So what DRM ultimately does is it provides a legal framework for enforcing a monopoly over the use of your book collection. So the DRM and the licensing prohibit the sale and lending of books. It makes them short-lived because if the DRM vendor disappears, then the books disappear with them. And we've seen this several times now, where various media have just popped like soap bubbles because the DRM vendor no longer exists. The hardware platform doesn't exist. Existing hardware can't phone home to find out whether or not it's still allowed to play your media, and your collections just vanish. Imagine a world where books sometimes disappeared wholesale because their publishers disappeared. How many of you own books from publishers that no longer exist? That's a pretty good bet because of all the mergers and acquisitions in publishing in the last 20 years. Imagine a world where you couldn't lend a book to a friend. Now, I used to work as a bookseller, an independent Canadian bookseller. I worked at an academic store in Toronto called College Books. It was a really good general interest academic store. And then I also worked at Baca, which is the oldest science fiction bookstore in the world, remaining anyway. At Baca, it was wonderful because you got to really observe how people bought books. And one thing I knew is that if two people came in and one of them was saying, you've got to read this book, you've got to read that book, you've got to read the other book, that second person would walk out with a stack of books. And very often they would say, I want my copy of that book back, you need to buy your own. Right? This is a frequent thing that you hear when you're a bookseller. Now, if you can't lend books anymore, then that whole value that is intrinsic to the book that gives it this penumbra, sentimental fetishism, disappears along with it. Neil Gaiman at last year at the EasterCon, which is the National British Science Fiction Convention, he said, hands up everyone in this room who has a favorite author. So let's do this. Everyone in this room has a favorite author. Okay. Now, if you got your favorite, if you discovered your favorite author's work because you bought a book by them, put your hand down. Okay. Everyone else in this room got their books because someone loaned them to them, or they checked them out of the library, they got it for free in some other way. Right now, most of us, if you're like me, your favorite author, you own everything they've ever published. You come see them when they speak. You buy the action figures to ride. If they ever got a pilot made for a TV show that was canceled, you would write angry letters to the network. All of those things that are part of what makes a writer's income possible, let alone artistic satisfaction, the rest of it, is tied up in this business of being able to lend books. Imagine a world where you couldn't inherit your parents' books and where you couldn't buy books that your children would inherit when you were done with them. If you designed a program to deliberately desentimentalize the book, you couldn't design a better one than this. And this is against the backdrop of other threats to reading that are far more interesting and important than piracy. The threats being all those things that you can do apart from reading these days that are one click of the mouse or fewer away. So you could join one of the 11 million people playing World of Warcraft, and instead of reading regurgitated, extruded Tolkien derivative, you could be regurgitated, extruded Tolkien derivative, with thousands of friends, and people who might be your friends, and people who might have sex with you someday. This is like being a science fiction fan without having to go to a con to meet other science fiction fans. They come with the book. There's YouTube, there's blogs, there's all these other things, social networking services, all these things that we can do with our discretionary time budgets that aren't reading, that all have this social component that books lose when you take away the right to lend and give away and sell. Tim O'Reilly says that the writer's greatest problem isn't piracy, it's obscurity. And this is also the book's greatest problem. So who can we rely on to help us save the book? I don't think we can rely on writers, because writers tend to be policy knaves, and they're scared, and a lot of them are cranky shut-ins. Publishers are scared. They're tempest-tossed. They get handed edicts from high up in their corporate structure. I've heard many people who work in the Hachette Empire, which is Little Brown and Orbit and many other publishers, say basically, word on high is we are officially against anything that involves making copies on the internet. So if you want to do free downloads, if you want to do Creative Commons licenses, you're in the wrong place. Even when the publisher of one of those imprints knows that that's crazy. Corporate has set the law across the entire sphere. And agents, well, agents are paid to be gunners. You know, they're paid to ask for the world, and so they'll ask for 26,000 words of licensing, and they'll get it. I mean, that's my agent's job too. So we can't rely on any of those people to save us from books being destroyed, the penumbra of sentimentality of books being destroyed by these programs. To reinvent the book is something far less valuable than it was in the pre-digital era. We can only solve this problem with policy. So many of you know that we've just concluded in this country a copyright consultation. This is the third crack in as many parliaments at reinventing Canada's copyright law that we've had, and it's the first one where they've actually asked the public, but it remains to be seen what they're going to do. The overwhelming public response was that Canada needs a more liberal copyright set of copyright rules that balances the rights of users of information and owners of books with creators and publishers. And of course, all these people cross over, right? There isn't a writer I know whose house isn't kind of buried under a mountain of dead trees. And if you went to them and said, we're taking away all your books because the publisher went under, they would go completely bonkers. We can look for the government introducing new copyright legislation very soon. And I wanted to give you a primer, especially since we're in Ottawa, where you're very close to your MPs, on what features that copyright legislation needs to have to protect the future of the book. The first is that it has to be lawful to break DRM for a lawful purpose. So what DRM presently does is it creates ownership of all the devices that can play back the book or the other media that's been logged with DRM for the technology company. So that ownership is held by the technology company, the vendor, the distributor. So this is as if Indigo could print their books with special ink that would only be readable underneath Indigo's light bulbs. And Indigo might have lovely stores, they might be very stylish, and their CEO might come out in a turtleneck twice a year and show you their awesome products, and their light bulbs might be very reasonably priced. But I think most of us would still agree that Indigo, nobody should own the exclusive right to make the light bulbs under which our books can be read. Nobody should have the exclusive right to make the chairs that we can sit in while we read our books. And nobody should have the exclusive right to make the devices we can use to read our electronic books. We need to outlaw unconscionable licensing terms. 26,000 word licenses are not in your interest, they're not in anyone's best interest, they're not comprehensible, and the idea that this is an agreement of some description does violence to the nature of agreement itself. We need to scale that back, we need to rein it in. We need to demand public access to publicly funded material. Much of the literature that's produced in Canada and other art that's produced in Canada is produced at public expense with public subsidy. We are an investor in this media. We should not be diluted down to a 0% interest by someone else who's put some commercial, some backing into it, a publisher or another investor who comes along after we've done the initial round of investment. We shouldn't be diluted down to zero. Our rights as minority shareholders in that media should be preserved. This isn't just good for readers. It may be the only help. This may be the only future for books that we have. So thank you very much.